Okay, and we're live. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. For this episode of No Capes, I am chatting today with Sara Golemon. Say hi.
My video has stalled on my side. Can you still see me?
Nope.
Uh-oh, that's bad. Well, hi, if you can hear me. Hi, I guess.
Oh, I think it came back. Maybe? Nope, that's mine. Okay.
Frozen with my hands out in sort of a jazz hands sort of position.
Jazz hands are important for podcasting.
Let me see if I can turn my camera off and back on again. This is quality television right here.
Everyone enter their seats. This is exciting stuff.
Gosh darn it. There, I seem to be back.
There you are. Okay.
You just have to be patient.
Patience is a good virtue. Okay, so first I want to, real quick, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, not that I think those people exist, but can you give a quick rundown of who you are?
Okay, hi, I'm Sara Golemon. I've been working on the PHP project for a long time, although not quite as active in the past few years, but I was pretty active sort of early 2000s for sure. I also work on the HHVM project, which is a Facebook piece of software that is sort of the other PHP runtime, if you will. Runs really fast code and introduces a new language called Hack, which is sort of like PHP with some more stuff and some of the colony bits taken out. I also have a few other open source projects like libssh2, which I released about a decade ago now because I have to feel old, and Folly, which is Facebook's open source library. I'm now the official maintainer external of that. So I like to do open source stuff.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about internals a little bit. So how did you get into doing PHP internals?
Well, I was using PHP sort of as, just a user. I'm writing my programs, I'm doing my little database things and writing apps for, at the time it was the US government, just, not like central, but just some little branch somewhere. And I would sit in the IRC channel, it was open projects at the time, what became Freenode. And people would ask questions and I'd start to answer them because like, oh, I get to feel smart and clever and that sort of thing. And that's always nice and rewarding. Eventually some questions seemed pretty to come up pretty commonly. And we're thinking, gosh, instead of giving people these long, like do all this code, how about if I just like build some of that functionality into PHP? How hard can it be, right? Oh, wait, I don't really know C very well. I mean, I saw it a couple of times, but well, let's check it out. And it turns out PHP was a really, really welcoming project. I mean, when I, went to the list and I said, hey, I think this code will do what I want. It'll add this extra functionality. Would you take it? It was responded with, can you reformat your patch? So I sent it again, and then it's like, okay, thank you. And that I was like, wow, open source is easy. So I sort of, just started doing some more and more on that project. And eventually people just said, just get yourself a CVS account and start committing directly. We're tired of taking your patches. So PHP became my gateway drug for open source. And the rest, as they say, is history. That's
pretty awesome. So you actually learned C specifically to contribute to PHP.
I knew some C already, but it's the sort of the difference between sort of academically, like, okay, I know what these structures in this language do if I think about it, but until you actually use it on a regular basis and like continuously apply it and learn it, you don't really internalize it as a fluent language. It's like theoretically I can speak Spanish, but because I've never been long-term immersed in anywhere where Spanish is the primary language, I don't really actually have a fluency in it. I wind up saying, ¿Dónde está Juan? Juan es en la biblioteca. And that's about as much Spanish as I can really manage on a day-to-day basis. And my level of C was sort of the same thing. It's like, okay, I know, the theory behind the heap and the stack and pointers to things and and that sort of thing. But I didn't really have a good grasp on practicals. And PHP really helped me build that practicals for C, and it probably took 4 years before I felt like I was really like, you know, good at C. So that's a long-winded answer, but yes.
Do you remember what that first feature was that you added?
The first one I actually did was adding arbitrary bases to log. Log by default would log in the natural logarithm base, and I added something that allowed you to specify the base you wanted to take the logarithm in, which is basically just doing a quick division. So the patch itself was like 3 lines of code, but figuring out those 3 lines was like that first good step, you know, into learning something more. And then we wind up with RunKit 10 years down the road, and or actually 10, like 4 years down the road, which does terrible, awful things to the PHP runtime. I've lost your audio though.
Yeah, no, my dog. That was intentional. So, do you know like how long ago that was, if you don't mind my asking?
I want to say it was 2000. Oops, sorry, I'm not holding. Yeah, I want to say it was 2001, 2003, something in the neighborhood. Definitely in the 21st century, because I only started using PHP in like '98, so it was at least a couple years. I want to say 2001. Yeah, November 2001. I could double check because it's all in, you know, the PHP site, you know, user logs when somebody got their CVS account and all that kind of thing. Okay.
So, I mean, committing to internals, I think, for a lot of people, for me, is pretty intimidating, and it's kind of a really, I don't know, big deal, I guess. So what advice would you have for someone who wants to contribute but doesn't really know where to start, or they're scared or intimidated?
Well, I think one of the things I see, particularly with female coders, this is more of a problem. But one of the problems that I see a lot is people are scared of being judged for their code, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to put this up and somebody's going to call me an idiot because I did this wrong or that wrong or the other thing wrong. And the best advice there is get over it. There are some jerks out there who are going to say that, but the majority of people who are doing open source are doing it because that's what they love, and that's, they're excited about the projects they maintain, and they're doing it for the love of it, and they're going to contributions as like, oh, here's somebody who cares about something that I care about, one of us, and if there are problems with it, they're going to say, hey, can you do this thing differently, or hey, have you considered that this might be an edge case that I'm not sure you're taking account of. And you grow and you become better that way. I mean, remember, like I said, when I first started working on the PHP project, my fluency in C was abysmal. It was not great. And now I feel like, I'm not going to call myself, on par with, K and R, but I'm going to say that I can get by any C code base and at least understand what's going on and start to contribute to it pretty quickly. Because that just takes practice. Any mastery just takes practice.
Do you think you would have been able to have that if it hadn't been for being on internals? That proficiency?
I think if I had gotten a different response from the PHP folk that had made me scared away, I think I could have gotten there eventually, because I mean, generally speaking, I love programming, and I probably would have gotten myself into that skill set at some point. But that may have taken an extra year or 2 or 5 years. I might not have never gotten to that point. I might have just felt like, wow, I stuck my neck out and I got shot down, and it's going to take me, 10 years to get up those spoons again. I would hope not. But yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out well. I mean, especially for the PHP community, because we all enjoy the stuff that you did.
It's worked out great for me. I mean, my work on PHP got me my job at Yahoo, basically, because Rasmus said, hey, here's somebody over here who is working at a freaking public university, wasting her time, put her to work doing something useful so she stops trying to put go-to into the language. I'm putting words in his mouth there slightly, but I think I might have had something to do with it.
Nice. So attempting to implement go-to got you a job at Yahoo.
You know, it got me noticed, and Rasmus's good words definitely helped. Rasmus had a huge reputation at Yahoo. Like his position there was Rasmus, basically. They had a lot of respect for anything he said. So his recommendation definitely helped me there, which in turn helped me shift into Facebook, which has been like perfect job for me.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because that's pretty amazing. Like, Facebook is a pretty big deal. How long have you been there?
It's going to be 5 years in a couple of months, which puts me at longer than 90-something% of the company, which is a little scary to think about, right? I mean, the company's like 10 years old, and just being there for half of it apparently puts you in the top 5%. Excuse me.
So have you ever met Zuckerberg?
Yeah. So the first project I was on there actually had nothing to do with PHP. It was mostly doing Java, believe it or not, because I wanted to learn new things. I wanted to break out of my little bubble of PHP that I was getting a little bit burnt out on. And he had our team in for multiple product reviews to sort of check the status of it and things like that. I definitely wouldn't say we're like on a first name basis sort of thing, but yeah. But he's not an aloof guy. Like he's got his desk around everyone else's desk, and he's just doing his job. It's easy to forget he's a multi-billionaire sort of thing.
That's good. What exactly do you do for Facebook?
So as I mentioned, HGVM is part of our infrastructure group. And I specifically am on the open source team. So my job really has nothing to do with Facebook, the product, at all. My job, excuse me, my job is about getting our code from our internal repo out to the world. That's the easy part. Pulling in contributions from other folks. So basically being that person that I was sending patches to 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So, responding and saying, oh, thanks for your contribution, and carefully wording the, hey, could you try doing this a slightly different way sort of messages. And also doing code of my own. So working on parity, making sure HHVM behaves just like PHP in as many situations as possible. And that includes a lot of really weird, bizarre PHP behaviors. I don't have to tell you what those are. You've been around that language long enough. And just generally evangelizing. So, I mean, part of my job is actually like flying out to different places to go to conferences to talk about HHVM and say, hey, check this out. This is like PHP, but different, and you should definitely try it out. Which kind of puts me in a weird spot sometimes, because there's a little bit of like friendly rivalry between HHVM and PHP, because PHP, like for almost all of its 20 years, has basically been the only implementation of the PHP language. Modulo, a few folks like Falinger and Rhodes End and a few other folks that have tried to re-implement PHP, but not really gotten much traction. So HHVM has gotten some traction. We're running Facebook, that's the easy one, but we're running Wikipedia, a bunch of other folks that I can't remember have announced or not, but you can check the public list somewhere. And so the response from the rest of folks working on PHP is a little bit of nervousness, because there's this alternate implementation. So that puts me in kind of a weird position sometimes of saying, no, wait, guys, it's cool. I love PHP. I want PHP to succeed. I'm happy PHP 7 is twice as fast as PHP 5. That's a good thing. I'm not threatened by speed competition here. Let's both get faster so that everybody wins. It's a really long-winded, rambling sort of answer to your question. But what do I do at Facebook? That's what I do.
Sounds like a pretty cool job. That's amazing. And since you have such a passion for open source, that's doubly great.
It's fantastic for me. Like, I cannot picture myself in a job I would like more, you know?
That's the dream, right? That's what we all want to do. So can you talk a little bit about, like, how did HHVM and Hack come to be?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
How did HHVM and Hack, how did that come about? What made you guys decide to do that?
So there's two separate evolutions there that don't necessarily have to do with each other, although one kind of helped the other. HHVM is about the fourth iteration of our attempt at trying to scale PHP past the point that it's able to scale at. So Facebook was originally built on your basic LAMP stack, right? It's Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That was the core that Zuck wrote in his dorm room at Harvard. Apache and PHP started to have some really serious scaling problems mid-2000s to the point where we literally just couldn't buy servers fast enough to serve all the people that were coming onto the site. It's a terrible problem to have, right? You've got too many visitors who want to go to your site. So one of our engineers sort of independently thought, well, hey, how can I solve this problem? I know C++ is pretty fast. What if I were to translate the entire PHP code base into C++, compile that down to native code, you just using GCC, and then we'll run that on the site. And he did that. Like, it was actually not too hard to write sort of the first version of what was called HPHP at the time, high performance PHP, or high pings PHP, depending on who you ask. The engineer's name is high ping. And that sort of worked as a sort of academic exercise. We saw an immediate speed up. It was at least 2x. I can't remember exactly how much it was, 2.5 times, something like that. But it had a few problems. Number one, it took a very long time to transcode and compile this massive code base. Because even at the time, Facebook was in the millions of lines of code. And so it's not exactly efficient for developers to be like, okay, I need to move this box over a little bit on this page. So I'm going to change some PHP code, and then I'm going to hit recompile, and I'll come back in a couple of days to see if it worked right. That's very not PHP design. So one of the things we did early on when we actually decided to move this into production is we said, okay, we're going to compile this to HPHP in order to run production, because production, you don't push that too often. You can spend the time compiling it and push it, and everybody's fine. And then dev boxes, we'll leave that on what we called APE, Apache PHP environment. So we had this duality thing sort of going on side by side, and that created its own problems because now, well, HPHP doesn't quite behave the same way that APE does. There's a few subtle differences that can be very problematic if you can't really test them until they hit production. That's how you break things. So we brought in what we called HPHPI. HPHPI is the interactive HPHP. This used the front end half of the HPHP compiler to build bytecode, which then could be, just to build an AST actually. And then we would walk the AST to execute those statements. Writing a virtual machine that walks an AST is really inefficient. You're basically compiling the script on the fly continuously and never really reusing your results. So our dev machines were crawling, but at least you could see the results of your actions fairly quickly, and then production would run really fast. It was a really weird, awkward state for us to be in. Both of those increased in their efficiency over time, and HPHP wasn't too terrible by the time we retired it, but it was still kind of slow. Obviously, this wasn't a perfect environment, though, because we were still slightly doing different actions in different situations. So at that point, the team working on the compiler had grown to much more than one person. There's probably a dozen people on there. And some guys on that team who had come from Microsoft working on like CLR and MSIL and things like that said, hey, we know that we can compile languages sort of just in time and sort of get what we want out of a PHP-ish runtime of running stuff live and still be able to get the sort of performance we want out of compiling stuff all the way to native code. Let's work on a JIT. Let's redesign basically the guts of this system from the inside out. And so that became the HHVM project. And by 2013, about January-ish, they had developed that runtime to the point where it was even in performance parity with the production mode of HPHP. So what this means is that dev machines can now run code, seeing live differences in their changes and work the way that PHP wants them to work, but it'll actually be executed in production at its full speed and even on dev machines. So yay, it's fast, clean, and cheap. Profit. Well, probably not cheap when you think about the engineer's time. And then so we eventually retired HPHPC. We got to retire HPHPI along with it. And now HHVM is like the sole runtime, and it feels a lot more like what a PHP environment is, sort of what you're used to using with PHP. There's a few little quirks of differences, but nothing that's going to really scare off your average developer. And so we've been getting faster in the past 2 years. For a while, folks liked to throw out the 10x PHP number, which I never fully believed. So I would put it on my slides with 10x with a big asterisk and say, I don't believe this number either, do your own test. As we've seen recently, particularly against PHP 7, HHVM is out in front, but certainly not by 10x. Even compared to PHP 5, I think we're only about 3x. And that is, of course, because PHP has been getting faster at the same time that HHVM has been getting faster. I don't know if you know the numbers, but if you look at performance of PHP 5.2 versus 5.3 versus 5.4 versus 5.5, you see this steady rise through all these versions. It hasn't been a regression. Very smart people have been working on the Zend engine and the PHP runtime, and they've been doing things to reduce the number of layers of indirection, reducing the amount of memory that needs to be allocated, caching different results in the right spots. And so even if you're only on 5.6, you're still running way faster than 5.2. So again, long-winded answer. I just sort of start talking and I get into this, standing behind a podium mode, and it's like, this is the stuff I'm excited about, right? Like this all comes back to, that sense of being able to do what you love. I love what I do, and I love, I love PHP. I'll just say it. I love PHP. And I love what has been happening to it in the past few years. Both the stuff that's been happening independently, just because people see PHP as still a viable and strong platform for the web, and the stuff that's been happening sort of reactive to HHVM. I'm going to say it. PHP 7 being fast is at least in part due to the fact that HHVM is standing there as much faster than PHP 5 and setting a goal. So I've been hugely jazzed by the whole thing.
Yes, that was actually going to be my next question. If you thought that HHVM had influenced the development of PHP in the way that it's gone with 7, and it sounds like yes.
Well, performance-wise, I definitely think we've had some influence. It's hard to tell exactly how much, but when I look at the way the internals have changed, because I know the internals of the engine pretty well. I wrote the book on it. I see how, in particular, the shape of the variable has changed. And I'm like, I recognize these new elements in this variable because they're exactly how HHVM implements it. Is that because good design is good design and people come up with it independently? Is it because somebody looks at HHVM and they think, hey, that's actually a good idea. Let's practice open source and maybe borrow a few things? I couldn't say for sure. But if HHVM has had that influence, then I'm intensely proud to have been able to help push PHP forward just by being here. That's huge for me. On the language side, it's inarguable that we've definitely been having an influence. The fact that scalar type hints are appearing in 7 is undeniably influenced by the fact that Hack came on the scene within less than a year before the RFC actually wound up passing, and said, hey, look what you can do with a typed PHP language. Here's how you can make this gradual transition from a really loosely typed language like PHP 5 and bring it into something that makes a little bit more sense, can be statically analyzed, and can protect you from your own stupidity, because that's really what the static analysis is for, is protecting you from yourself. it's inarguable that HHVM has had a influence in that regard. We've been talking about static types in PHP before, scalar types in PHP before, but they've never really passed. And I think hack has been a big part of making sure they get over the line.
You talked a bit about the evolution of HHVM and how that came to be. I think you mentioned that there was a similar yet partially unrelated story regarding hack.
Okay, so hack, well, they're parallel evolutions is all I wanted to say there, because development to hack, that has obviously been easier since we control the runtime that it runs on. You know, we don't have to say, okay, well, the next version of PHP is out. How are we going to bodge in this, you know, this new language that we've made up into this other runtime? That would be a lot harder if we were just trying to do it as an extension. So HHVM has enabled us to say, what would we do with this language if we could do anything with this language? Well, let's change it to a new one. So that's where, I don't know, that's sort of where the opportunity to create a new language came from. As for the language itself, I wouldn't, you can use the word evolving in terms of it started out just as typed PHP and then sort of grew into these other things like collection literals and short lambdas and async functions and generators and XHP, all these other little bits that fall into the hack language. But those are iterative evolutions. They're not really sort of like changing direction midstream.
Do you have a favorite hack feature?
A favorite hack feature? So the one that I really, do I have a favorite hack feature? So I think the immediate answer that I want to give to that is short lambdas. That's the double arrow greater than symbol. And this is just a shorthand syntax for closures. So you would say something like $x lambda symbol x plus 1 is the equivalent of function $x open brace return x plus 1 close brace. It's just less writing. It's a lot neater to look at. It's a lot easier to work with. I like that one for its simplicity and for what it does for code readability. The one that I like from a technical standpoint is async. Async sort of tries to answer the question, how come PHP doesn't allow for multi-threaded programming, by saying, here are the things that you actually want multi-threaded programming for, but without all the complexity of multi-threaded programming. Because if you write a program that accesses multiple threads, you have to worry about locks and you have to worry about contention for resources. Whereas if you write an async aware function, all you have to worry about is the task that you're working on is going to have some blocking moments in it that you're going to politely release control over. It's cooperative multitasking rather than real multi-threaded activity. From a technical standpoint, I love that feature because it can make so much more difference in the speed of a given page than all the jitting and playing around with memory sizes in the world could actually do. When we were in our most recent lockdown, we were trying to make all these open source frameworks and applications run faster. So we looked at WordPress, we looked at MediaWiki, we looked at Drupal, and we said, okay, what are they spending their most time in? Can we optimize these functions, whatever, make them faster? And we came out of that usually with 2 to 5% wins on these things. And we went, yay, that's a great thing. But when we actually looked at the frameworks themselves and said, how can we make these things run faster? We got a 20+% win on MediaWiki by just changing how they serialize some of their data. They were using a really expensive routine that required walking trees multiple times, and it was just ugly. With one day of sitting down and writing a patch to MediaWiki, we got it to run way faster. And that sped it up on PHP and on HHVM. Everybody wins. Similarly, when we looked at WordPress, somebody on our team who was really familiar with WordPress wrote a plugin. So you don't even have to change WordPress itself. You can do this through a plugin. it changed the data access to using asynchronous routines. He got something like a 30–40% win on that thing, just from changing the way the PHP code runs. That unfortunately doesn't benefit PHP runtimes because PHP doesn't support async, but on HHVM it's a big speed boost, and it has nothing to do with jitting or how you run the code, only that you do it using these features.
That's pretty awesome. So your team actually spends time making patches and pull requests to other open source projects to make them faster?
We don't do a lot of it. We did it during our lockdown because our lockdown was specifically to focus on ways to make non-Facebook code run faster. The main performance team is focusing on making Facebook.com run faster because that's what they get paid to do. My team, which is the open source team, is like, okay, that's great. HHVM is running really fast on Facebook workloads, but there's some very interestingly written code out there. I use WordPress as my example because WordPress has a fanatical dedication to backwards compatibility. They want to be able to run on really old versions of PHP. They want to make sure that all of the oldest plugins out there that are still popular are still going to run. So they wind up with code that looks like it's full of every anti-pattern. Like if you were to write a book of anti-patterns, you would take the WordPress code base and slap a title on it. I don't want to offend WordPress people, but because God bless you, WordPress is a juggernaut of the internet. It is what makes PHP popular, so I love WordPress, but there is some really questionable code in there. And it's hard to justify making your just-in-time compiler optimize these anti-patterns. So when we went to look at that, one of the things we looked at is like, what can we do to help WordPress modernize their code base without sacrificing their old users and their old plugins? So I don't want to get angry letters from WordPress users. I do love your platform. It's just interesting.
No, I think most people can agree to that. I mean, it's amazing and it works. There's some interesting code.
It's phenomenal that it works. And the fact that so much of the internet runs on it is a testament to the dedication of the people who work on it.
Yeah, definitely. So did you have any involvement in the building of HHVM or the design of Hack? Were you an active part of that?
So, I mean, yes is the short answer to that. So I do spend a lot of my time working on the internals of HHVM. The entire module loading is my design. The extension API, well, parts of the extension API are my design. So we had an extension API in place, what we called our interface definition language. It required you to write a JSON file to describe the interface, and then during the compilation process, C++ files would be generated with their mangled symbol names in there, and that would feed into the front-end compiler, and it was an ugly state. So I rebuilt something that would be much more friendly to version agnosticism and loading things dynamically at runtime, and just making it easier to write extensions. The way you write an extension for HHVM right now, by the way, is you actually write PHP code. And you write as much of your extension just as straight, pure PHP code as you can. So you just say, function myxt_bob, put your parameters out there. And when you need to go into C++, you use this annotation, _s then __ native > that marks it as a native function. And then you just throw out a semicolon at the end, kind of like you would an abstract. And then the runtime magically turns this into a C++ call. So internally in your extension code, you literally write function whatever with your types that match your PHP types, and it just maps all the data straight in. So you don't have to know all this weird parse parameters and return type and things like that. All these macros that PHP is full of. PHP has a billion macros in its internals code, and learning those is half the work. You don't have to do that with HHVM because of the interface that I built. So that's probably my biggest piece of contribution right there. But I also, I work on trying to make it faster because that's sort of the currency of the project. If you can make it faster, then you're allowed to make it a little bit less slower by introducing a feature. So I work on performance. I work on parity to make sure that we act just like PHP in those weird edge case scenarios. Yes is the answer to your question.
That's awesome. That's my nerd brain is blown by that. So
again, I keep talking fast because this is just I love doing this stuff. This is the stuff that makes me smile.
Don't stop. It's really great.
I told my boss I would work for free, but don't stop paying me.
Fair enough. What other open source projects does Facebook have? I think I heard you list one or two more. There's
a bunch actually. So sort of starting with the ones that are next to HHVM, because those are the ones I know best. There's Folly, which is the Facebook Open Source Library, LY. We don't know what those letters stand for. That's just sort of a big bucket of helpful C++11 kind of things to help make writing code a little bit easier. There's McRouter. McRouter is basically it's a layer for people using Memcache to help with things like sharding and replication and things like that. So instead of having to build all this knowledge into your application, you tell your McRouter proxy, and it knows, it keeps the connections open to all your slaves, it trades all the keys, it keeps everything consistent, and it provides a good middle layer. It's also the thing that powers our asynchronous Memcache layer. There is WebScale SQL, which is actually a joint project between us and a bunch of other companies. It's a derivation of MySQL, actually. There's React, which I'm sure a lot of people in the web world have seen, and React Native. Flow, Nuclide is the editor we just released. These are all sort of pieces that fit together into a common ecosystem. If you're building a new web project, you're probably going to be using a lot of these things, or at least we hope you're going to be using a lot of these things. HHVM for the server-side component, React for all your user interface stuff, and Nuclide to edit all your files and bring them together. Beyond that, gosh, we've got Thrift, Proxygen. Wangle is one that's about to come out. It's actually an offshoot of Folly. I know Wangle sounds weird. It's about, it's basically futures for C++.
Okay, so we can talk about that for a minute, because it seems like you guys have quite a bit of fun with your naming. Hip hop virtual machine and hack as the name of the language, which I thought was
yeah. So the thing with hip hop was kind of a backronym, right? It started as HPHP, which was fine as long as that was an internal project. But the PHP license says that if you want to use some of our code, and we do borrow code out of PHP source, you can't use the name PHP in it. So we said, what can HPHP stand for? How about hip hop? That fits. Throw a couple of vowels in there, and you're all fine. So that literally is the genesis of the name hip hop. And then that lent itself into HHVM, or hip hop VM. Hack is sort of like it's the company motto, I guess. Like if you look around campus, you'll see hack everywhere. And that's been this campus, the one before that, the one before that. I think Zuck's probably been toting that around as his personal motto since 1993 or whatever. If he was alive then, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely some there are some names that make you realize how many 20, 21-year-old dudes there are in charge of naming some of these projects. But I think for the most part, we managed to come up with, grown-up sounding names, React, Flow, those, they sound a little bit corporate-ish, but not too much.
Well, I definitely don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's fun, and
it's okay to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting, though. I don't know. I mean, Facebook is a pretty big player in the web world, and it's a very large company and a very profitable company at this point. I don't know that I can think offhand of any large profitable companies that actively open source so much of their work.
So Google has a lot of open source projects, but I mean, and I don't speak for Google. I've never worked there. I only know a few people who work there. But I do somewhat get the impression that Google really only open sources stuff that are either really on the periphery of what they do, or are just individual employees' personal projects that they've slapped their name on because they get to own everything their employees create or whatever. We certainly use some of Google's open source. Double convert. Oh no, I'm not sure that's Google's, but Gtest, Gflags, Glog, obviously Google stuff. There's a degree of sharing out there. I don't know if Apple doesn't really open source much, do they? Nor Yahoo. That's a good point. We have a pretty good open source track record, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying no one does it, but it's certainly not the norm. And you guys are obviously pretty dedicated to it.
Yeah, it's hard to say because, I mean, open source has gone through its own sort of evolution and roller coaster of popularity. I had this conversation with John Coggeshall a year or two ago. He was worried that basically the torchbearers of open source are growing out and sort of getting out of the scene. We're not seeing as many of the younger kids really embracing what open source means beyond simply, hey, free stuff for me. I'm not sure I agree with them. I think there's a lot of great projects out there that are started by young kids who at least appreciate that to the point of like, I am going to do work and not get paid for it immediately. But when you compare it to like the 90s, everybody and their cousin was coming out with their lone Linux distribution, for example. Corel. You don't see that as much right now. You see a much more calmed marketplace in terms of corporate-backed open source, I think.
Yeah. So that brings up another question. How much, and say as much or as little as you can on this. I don't know if it's a okay question, but how much of other people's open source work does Facebook use?
That's a good question. I don't think I even know the answer to that, so it's not even a question of whether I can answer it. I know certainly within the projects that I'm really close to, I'll talk about how much of other people's open source does HHVM use, right? We borrow a ton of code out of PHP source. We use, like I mentioned, those Google libraries. If you look at github.com/HHVM/HHVM third party, that's basically the laundry list of other people's open source code that we use in order to run HHVM. Beyond that, obviously WebScale SQL was built on MySQL, so that is definitely standing on the shoulders of giants there. I mean, Facebook sort of has its roots in open source. Like I said, it was built on a LAMP stack originally, and whatever else was in the Social Network movie, that much at least was fairly accurate. As many things that could be taken out of open source were and continued to be.
Cool. Let's see. Other questions. Okay, so something else that I wanted to talk about is speaking, and you do a fair bit of that. How did you get into speaking at conferences?
So I can't remember who actually pushed me to do it. The first one I spoke at was PHP Tech 2006 in Orlando. And gosh, I don't know who pressured me into doing it, but basically it was, hey, this looks like a lot of fun, this whole flying around and talking in front of people. The only PHP conference I'd been to at that point was it PHP West, was held in somewhere right nearby San Francisco area, which is where I actually met Wes for the first time in person, although we'd been emailing a lot previously. Somebody at that conference came up to him and said, "Excuse me, are you the Wes?" Something that we kid with him about still. But I mean, that sort of exposure got me wanting to be there and doing that and be that person and be talking, you know, to other people about this thing that I actually care about. In 2006 in particular, that was the year I published my book. So I was kind of like in this good spot to be an authority on something. So I submitted to Orlando, and I can't think of his name. I always call him Chocula. The guy who used to run PHP Architect. It'll come to me later on, and I feel really bad now. But he said, "Yeah, come on down. Let's do your presentation." And so I got in there, and I'm talking about how PHP ticks, and I'm like, well, these. This is how Alexa works. This is how Parser works, and that sort of thing. The stuff that I was excited about at the time. But I remember the thing that really had the biggest impact in that presentation was at the end, somebody says, "What is this TSR MLS thing?" And I'm like, oh, shoot, how do I even explain that? I had a ThinkPad X41 at the time, which was actually a tablet computer. So I flipped the thing around, pop it down, and I started drawing like, one of those football announcers saying, oh, this thing points to that thing, points to the other thing. And the whole audience just sort of went. And I think that was the moment I was hooked, because I had that audience's entire attention right there. And so I've just been, I keep, submitting to these conferences, and they keep inviting me because apparently they like what I have to say. And I get to see all these great places, Gosh, I have been to England more times than I can count in the past 5 years. Germany, I was just in New Zealand. I get to see all these places that I probably would never go to otherwise, because I'm fundamentally a cheapskate. And that's been the huge thing for me, just being able to talk to people who care about what I do, and maybe get them excited, It's
a pretty awesome feeling. Were you scared the first time?
Oh, terrified. So I had 2 talks at that conference, and the first one, I've just got this big ball of acid on my stomach, and I'm just nervous as heck. And I get up there and I get through the thing, and it's fine. It goes okay. The second one, I was scheduled for immediately after lunch, and they served this bow tie pasta in a white sauce with red bell peppers in it. I cannot stand red bell peppers, but I didn't realize it until I started eating it. And I'm like, well, it's the only food I got. I'm just going to pick them off, and I'll eat the rest of it. But they have this oil in them, right? And the oil gets into the pasta, and I was so close to throwing up by the end of that presentation, because I have all these nerves and all this like, oh my God, I'm just going to say something really stupid on top of horrible indigestion. But made it through safe. So
2006 was your first talk. You've been doing this for 9 years now?
Yeah. 9 years then, yeah.
Do you still get nervous?
I get a different kind of nervous. Like I still sort of like feel this tension sort of building up until I actually get to perform. And then once that's done, I have this release of anxiety, and I can actually enjoy the rest of the thing and get drunk and sing, songs, karaoke stuff. But, I still get this sort of this tension of like, God, I'm going to, this is going to run too short, and I'm going to have to say I'm done with extra time left over, or gosh, somebody's going to ask a question that I just don't know how to answer, and I'm going to look like an idiot. And fortunately, like, these things never come to pass, but you can't, like, I can't let go of that fear that something terrible is going to go wrong. It is absolutely imposter syndrome. It is this certainty that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and they're gonna know, Can't get away from it.
I think everybody has that.
I think they do. If they don't, then they're probably, what's the word? Can't find the word. This is one of those things that I am terrified of happening on stage, and now here it is happening on YouTube. Great. Not psychopath. Whatever. Sociopath. Thank you. If you don't have that feeling, you're probably a sociopath.
Okay. Um, what is your process for preparing a talk? How do you, do you have an ideation process? What do you go through to prepare?
So my first step is I throw together a slide deck, and my rule is about 2 minutes per slide. So I think about what are all the points I want to cover. What are the high level things, and I'll put up one slide per high level thing that probably won't actually appear in my abstract slide. Then I fill out my different sections, and I try to balance the amount of time, usually equally, but I might switch things around if I think one section is more important than the other. And eventually I come up with enough slides to fit the amount of time that I'm trying to hit at 2. Then I actually walk through the thing, and I will sit on my desk and I'll just start paging through the slides, and I'll pretend like I'm talking to someone, and I'll say, and then this thing and the other thing, and you know, I'll try to come up with some jokes to throw in there. Most of the jokes that I do on stage, I'm not coming up with them on the stage. I'm probably already rehearsed on them, although occasionally one or two have come out, and those are the usually ones that land the best. By the time I've actually given the presentation, I have presented it to myself at least 4 times. And I have sort of worked out the kinks of what I want to say, to the point where when I'm actually on stage, I'm not even thinking about the content. I actually like to say that it's not me on the stage, because I am terrified of people. But this sort of performer Sarah pops out and takes over for me. Performer Sarah is a great extrovert. She can say anything and just keep talking. And the only way to get her to shut the hell up is for somebody in the back of the room to hold up the sign that says you're out of time. And then once I'm done, I'm just like, what the hell just happened in the past 45 minutes? Because I wasn't there. That's how my process goes.
Do you ever record yourself when you're running through?
I did a few times. ZenCon 06, I did that. I just threw a video camera on a tripod in the corner of the thing, and I just recorded myself. The recording came out horribly because I didn't have a microphone on, but I did get to see a lot of really important things. Things that don't show up in my rehearsals in front of my work monitor. Things like constantly fidgeting with my hands in really distracting ways. Things like walking backward and forward and sort of doing that rocking motion to the side, the things that are really distracting to an audience and keep them away from what you're actually trying to convey. I'm probably doing a lot of them right now because this is a really hard habit to break, especially for somebody who likes to talk with their hands. Is the other thing. Like, I heard myself so many times, which is why that was basically what got me in the habit of rehearsing what I'm going to say. Prior to that, I would go through a single run through just to make sure I had a vague idea of what I wanted to say. After that, I did it at least 4 times, so that while I might a few times, the big blocks of what I'm going to say are just ready to go, and it's like I'm playing off a tape recorder. So yeah, so I've recorded myself a couple times.
Is it, so I still cannot watch recordings of myself.
It's hard.
Is it, right? It's really uncomfortable. It's amazing.
It is. So when I do podcasts like this, or when I, or video casts as this happens to be, or when I'm at a conference where somebody has recorded it, I'll start to watch it, and then I'll skip through. Like, I don't want to watch the whole thing. Not because I already know the content, but because I just kind of can't bear to watch myself. If I remember that I had a particular section that seemed to resonate well and really capture people well, I'll go and review that. I did a presentation in Los Angeles for a Drupal camp down there. And I remember coming out of that thinking, my God, that was my best performance ever. I need to know what I said, because all I really knew was the sort of response and reaction I got from the crowd. So I had to go back to the actual recording, and there was one particular thing in there which Cal Evans picked up on, and he asked me about it shortly after that, doing the podcast. I was telling the story about having realized it was while I was working at Yahoo. I got hospitalized, and in the middle of my hospitalization, I'm on like not morphine, but something like it, something where you have to hit a button and it only runs every 15 minutes. And I'm just completely out of it. I'm passed out, and somewhere in the middle of the night, I wake up and I'm like, there is an XSS in Japanese search. Absolutely positive of this fact. And so I pull out my laptop and I confirm it. And it's like, yes, that problem is there. So I call up my coworker, get her voicemail. I don't actually get her because it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, here's the thing you have to do. Japanese thing. No, with the search, Japanese search, you have to put in its XSS. You need to fix the XSS grapefruit. Because of course I'm drugged out of my mind. But like the grapefruit at the end, which didn't actually happen, by the way, that got a huge laugh for some reason. And the audience was actually paying attention to everything after that point. Like that was just this magic pulling them in thing. So if you ever hear me just throw in this drug-induced haze grapefruit story, it's because I don't think I have the audience and I need to pull them in just a little bit.
That's a really good tactic. That's something I hadn't heard of before. If you had one piece of advice to give to a new speaker or a novice speaker, what would you tell them?
It's corny as hell, but be yourself. Don't try to, I just told this story about how, I like to tell this story that ends in grapefruit because I'm high on drugs, but don't try to invent things to be funny. Don't try to invent this, this persona. Just let whatever the heck is natural come out. The story that I told, this wasn't something I had sat and rehearsed. This is just something that I got to that point in talking about XHP and how it can prevent cross-site scripting. And just, presenter Sarah jumped in and said, hey, by the way, did I ever tell you about that time I was high? It's just whatever comes out of your mouth is good because you're there talking because you are into what you're talking about. You submitted to that conference because you care about it. You submitted to that conference because, oh my gosh, this is the stuff that gets me excited. This is the stuff that I go home and talk to my partner about because I can't stop thinking about it, not because I'm a workaholic, but because this is really cool. If you're presenting on stuff that makes you feel like that, then nothing else matters. What you say is going to be right because that's your house. That is where you shine. So just shine. And I'm trying to keep this PG, by the way. There were a lot of F-bombs that I held back there.
I saw that and also appreciate that. But the advice to just shine is...
Speaking of F-bombs, I don't know if anyone remembers Terry Che. He was doing a lot of conference speaking in sort of the mid-first decade there. And he would drop F-bombs left and right. And you know what? People loved him for it. Not because he's edgy and throwing out F-bombs, but because he's just talking as himself. He's just saying, like, these are cool things. This is X and this is so cool. And F that thing and F the other. If you've ever heard Terry Che speak, that's exactly what he sounds like. Except he doesn't say F.
I have not had the pleasure of hearing him speak, but I will.
He hasn't done it lately. I think he got out of it. I don't know what he's doing lately. Terry, are you out there? We miss you.
Are any of his videos on YouTube?
Oh, I'm sure there must be a few. I'm sure he's been recorded a few times.
Okay. Well, anyone watching, go check that out.
Go check out Terry Che. He's a good presenter. You have squeaking going on.
Yes, sorry, I keep throwing my dog's toy, but she's okay. So we'll go.
See, I closed the door so my dog wouldn't come in. I was thinking ahead.
Yeah, obviously I failed at that. She's so cute though.
I do like dogs.
Okay, so we're about out of time. It's been an hour, but there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about. If you have a couple more minutes.
Sure.
Okay, so I know I look up to you immensely for the work that you've done on Eternals and Hack and HHVM, and it's just, you're a huge inspiration to me. As a young-ish woman, I think I still qualify.
Younger than me.
I'm a 20-something for a few more years.
Definitely younger than me.
To see a woman that's really brilliant and has done really great things for the community, it inspires me, and it makes me think that Like I could do that. Which
Of
is,
course you can do that.
I think women, I mean girls, whatever, we need that. But I'd be interested to hear who some of your role models were or are.
That's a hard one. Like role model itself is a term I have a really hard time with. I don't want to say I have no role models because that makes me sound really conceited. Like there's nobody for me to look up to. You know, there are definitely people who I respect a whole lot. You know, I've got people like on my own team who I look at some of their programming ability and I'm just like, I am a complete idiot who doesn't understand computers at all compared to some of the people that I work with. If you want, I wouldn't call them role models, but they're definitely people whose work I respect. I absolutely respect Rasmus Zev Dandy. You know, Rasmus doesn't care about languages, and this whole thing of PHP becoming popular is more of a nuisance than something he's particularly trying to support. But you know, the fact that he put together his original, you know, personal homepage tools and just said, here's a thing, world, have some fun with it. At a point where, you know, distributing open source stuff actually required more work than it does today. Today, you hit initialize repo on GitHub and you push some code and it's there. You know, at the time, you know, you had to like make these, you know, split archives to put on Usenet and things like that. And it was a very different world for distributing software. And he just said, here's a whole bunch of work that I've done to make my life easier. Make your own lives easier too. And then he took the contributions and like collaborated with people early on to make it into something even better. And when Zev and Andy came along with their rewrite of the engine, he's like, okay, yeah, that looks really cool. Let's bring this together. Let's make it even better. And then, oh, let's make that, you know, Zend Engine 0 that's running PHP 3. Let's make that way better with PHP 4. And let's make it way better. Zev and Andy have gone and built an entire business off of that open source contribution 15 years ago. And God bless them for it. I respect their ability to start with something not expecting a payoff, and stick with it in a way that's allowed them to continue contributing in various ways to that. Gosh, I don't know where I could name a bunch of people who I really respect. And if I just started naming names, I probably wouldn't know where to stop. So I'm going to stop there. I respect you for running this podcast.
Oh.
It takes dedication and work and a certain degree of bravery to put yourself out there, because there are people who are going to be critiquing your work and making themselves feel better by calling you names for it. I haven't seen this. I don't know if it's happening, but you know, like there's the danger of that happening. You know, just the act of putting yourself out there puts you in harm's way. I put myself out there, and that puts me in harm's way too. I've fortunately only fielded a little bit of it, but none of it lasts very long. Certainly not like some more high-profile people have seen. We're lucky that we're in this little niche. You know, we're not particularly out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. In respect to women in programming, I think, you know, we're both active in the PHP Women group. What do you think we could be doing better to help encourage?
That's such a hard one, because I mean, it's not like we can just like go out and start recruiting programmers, right? It's like, you there who have put your life into whatever profession that you're in, let's say manufacturing. you should really get into programming because we need more women programmers. That doesn't make any kind of sense. That doesn't work. We can't just go getting people. So how do we encourage more people to actually get into programming so that there's a better representation?
Not just encourage people to come. I think that a part of the problem
is getting people to stay.
Getting people to stay and getting the people that are here to stand up, to be more visible. I guess it's very easy to want to hide so that you don't put yourself in harm's way, you don't open yourself up for attacks, and just kind of stay in the background.
Well, I mean, I have at various points tried to encourage people like to submit for conferences and speak, because it's great. They pay for you to go out there. Well, some of them do. And you get to meet people and you get to exchange ideas. And like conferences aren't just about the presentations. It's a lot about the hallway track. At the most recent PHP Northwest, I twisted Andrea Fould's arm until she would finally actually come down. Like, okay, I'm going to find you a room to stay in. I'm going to find you somebody to sponsor your ticket. I didn't actually do a lot of those things. A lot of that stuff was done by PHP women, but I did put in a fair amount of prodding to her to just say, come down, come down. And she did eventually catch a bus from Aberdeen down to Manchester. And from what I understand, she had a great time. You know, she met a lot of people face to face. It's somewhat interesting that she officially left the community a few months after that. I hope not because of related things. I mean, she was certainly becoming more active after that point, you know, getting the scalar type hints RFCs basically almost to the point of being passed before she withdrew them. I think she left because the environment on the internals list can occasionally be difficult to work with, just because people have very strong opinions and they want to make sure they're heard. She said it was because she was swamped with schoolwork. I'll believe that. I'm digressing a lot here, aren't I? It's very warm here. It's really hot today. That's why I have the window open.
I've got two questions from viewers, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sorry. Stop me from babbling on because I'm just going to go incessantly.
So one question was, what do you see in the future of Hack?
What do I see in the future of Hack? So I'm trying to think of what the Hack language people are working, because we have a separate team for people actually developing features into a language. I know they are working on stuff. What are they working on these days? I'm drawing a total blank. Like I said, it's really warm. Future for Hack. Well, I would love to see more Hack adoption. So like Wikipedia is running on HHVM right now, but they're not running Hack. They're running regular PHP code. And they, from what I can tell, want to remain running regular PHP code for the foreseeable future. Largely that's because they want to make sure that if Facebook suddenly pulls out and there's no support for HHVM, they still have an escape hatch for themselves, and bless them for that. I'm not against that. But I'd like to see some HHVM users really start to embrace Hack. Maybe see some frameworks in Hack get built. Make it easier for somebody to look at HHVM, Hack, React, Nuclide, all those things, see them as a full platform that they'll actually want to use, rather than just that other PHP that has that weird syntax. The only really big user of Hack right now is Facebook. And I think the language as a whole would benefit if we saw more people using Hack, because we'd start to see more pressure for some of the better features of Hack to get into PHP. In my ideal world, PHP takes on a lot of these things that we've built into Hack. Short lambdas at the very least. I think everybody's kind of in favor of short lambdas on the internals groups, although we can't quite decide what they should look like. Some of the littler features, I wanted to get trailing commas in. I actually put up an RFC for that. It's a silly thing, but it's one of those things I find myself using in Hack a lot. Yeah. I don't have a good answer to that.
No, I think that was a good answer. We're planning on using Hack and HHVM for our newest API at work. So.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Yes.
That's good to know.
Because I like it and I get to build that. So.
Let me know if you guys run into stuff that doesn't make sense to you or isn't working right, because I mean,
definitely expect that. I mean, that doesn't make sense.
The language is sort of, evolving, so it's not too late to change some things. Although others, we worry who's reusing them. Right. It was a lot easier before we announced Hack because we could change the language all we wanted. Now we have to be careful about it.
I'm pretty excited about it. It's going to be a bit of a challenge for me. I think hopefully not too much.
Once you go Hack, you never go back.
Something new and something interesting, and I'm really excited for it. And after talking to you and seeing how excited you are and some of the features you mentioned, I'm even more excited. So, yay. The other question I had was from Sean Walker, and he wants to know what are some of your biggest lessons learned from being a programmer at a big company?
Lessons learned. Well, number one, there will be somebody smarter than you. No matter how clever you think you are, you're going to run into somebody who just knocks your socks off, and you just have to say, wow, I don't know how to program, and I don't know what I'm doing in this industry. That doesn't mean you're as bad as you think you are, but there's always going to be somebody a lot smarter than you out there. That's particularly at Facebook. That's been one of my biggest lessons. I would say at Yahoo, I didn't have as many occasions where I ran into somebody and said, wow, I just need to bow to their wisdom because, but definitely at Facebook, that's been a big problem. That's a lesson in humility for me to learn.
I actually prefer working at jobs where I'm in the lower percentile of intelligence. I think it helps me learn and grow.
I want to be right in the middle somewhere, to be honest. I want to be smarter than some people so that I can feel good about myself, but I want to be dumber than some people so that I can learn new things.
Yeah.
It's like that sweet spot.
Somewhere in there where I can help the people, that aren't as smart, and then I can still learn a lot. But I think if I ever got to the top of the smartness scale, I would probably be pretty bored.
I feel like I shouldn't say less smart, more smart, because that's really heavily loaded, but maybe less and more experienced in specific areas. Let's go with that.
That's better. That's more nuanced. I'm not so good with the English. Okay, the last question. Language. Yeah, that's my only language, and I still can't manage it.
I thought. Okay, I'm thinking of somebody else then. Never mind. Hi.
No, I don't speak anything but English and bad English.
Polish.
No, English, bad English, and Pig Latin, and some Spanish.
Yeah.
But
you speak patently. Wonderful way. I'll show you ide estre of a adcaspe in a igpadly.
IASK? I think, maybe. I don't know. You speak really fast Pig Latin, so that was a bit bad. Okay, Sean had one more question that came in right under the wire.
Okay.
Where can we keep up to date with Facebook's open source stuff?
So I personally like Twitter for this. It's a horrible thing to say because maybe Facebook is actually a social media platform. But Twitter for it, FB Open Source is sort of the main clearinghouse of open source stuff. For particular projects, most of them have Twitter accounts. There's the Hip Hop VM account, the Hackling account. There's a libfolly account, but I haven't actually tweeted anything from that yet because I've only just taken the project over. Do some Googling, you'll find the various different accounts that are out there. Obviously, we do exist on Facebook as well. There is a HHVM page where we just do announcements from. There's also an HHVM General and an HHVM Internals group. If you actually want either some help with running HHVM, that'd be in HHVM General. Or if you're interested in helping out with the development of HHVM, that would be in HHVM Internals. There's Code.facebook.com has like blog entries and things that go up about all our various projects going on. There is a Nuclide group if you're interested in the editor.
Probably the GitHub page too would be as a list.
Oh yeah, GitHub. What a crazy thought. Sort of our main project repo is github.com/Facebook. That is where HHVM lives, Facebook/HHVM. There are other sort of sub projects. Excuse me. There's github.com/HHVM has basically all the other stuff for HHVM besides the interpreter itself. GitHub.com/ I think Nuclide has its own project group. I'm not sure. Google can tell you the answers to most of these. But Twitter is what I like. So that's what I can use.
So watch the Twitter. I just followed SB Open Source. I already followed Hacking HHVM, but now I follow that one too. And we are about 17 minutes over time. But it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I think that your passion for open source and what you do is pretty infectious. So that's amazing. And
infection is what I'm going for. Because I want other people to care about open source the way I do, because I think it's a really important part of our computing ecosystem. The world of technology would not be where it is today without open source, without a lot of really dedicated people doing a lot of thankless work. We wouldn't be here. Say what you will about Linus Torvalds, but Linux has been a huge thing for the world, and PHP has been at that same level because we have driven the web forward in ways that other technologies just haven't. So open source, man. It's
everybody
amazing.
Open source.
Open all the things.
All the things. Well, so I really want to thank you for coming on, and it's been a pleasure. And thanks to everyone who watched.
Thank you, everyone.